The WTA final draw is entertaining to say the least. Welcome tennis fans to Tennis Traverse Exploring the Game, the podcast that delves into the heart of the tennis world. I'm your host Ivy Zhang, and in today's episode, I will be highlighting the Paris Masters tournament and the WTA Finals. So before we begin, I do want to say that there's so much action that's going on right now that I can't cover just because tennis is approaching the end of the season and there's so much tournaments that's happening. So for example, Vienna Open, which is won by Jack Draper, and this happened last Sunday. Jack Draper beat Karen Khachanov in a final with a score of 6-4, 7-5. I think I started looking more into Draper after his US Open run, and I can just say that he's never let me down. I think apart from the physical struggles that he have with his body, I think he's a really talented player, and he uses his left-handedness to its extreme. I think especially on his serve and on his forehand, I think they're just extremely powerful weapons, and there's still so much room genuinely for improvement. I think there's still so much for him to do to improve and get even better than he already is, which is, I think, he is like a player that we definitely should watch out for next year, and maybe just some of his matches against top players, not necessarily the best, such as Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, but against players like, for example, Andrei Rublev or Grigor Dimitrov, players like those sort of nature, or even, let's say, maybe against Zverev. I think Draper really have a chance of beating these players. So on his run in Vienna, he did beat some pretty amazing players such as Lorenzo Musetti. I think the matchup between Musetti and Draper is one that a lot of people should be looking out for. So Musetti beat Zverev in the quarterfinal with a score of 6-4 in the deciding set, and then Draper beat Musetti in a great match, honestly. In the semifinals, even though the score is 6-2, 6-4, I think there were a lot of great rallies. Both of these players had 10 or more break points, but Jack Draper converted 5 out of 11, whereas Lorenzo Musetti only converted 2 out of 10. But regardless, I think the three players that are going to maybe prove themselves to have like a more incredible season next year will be Lorenzo Musetti, Jack Draper, as well as Arthur Fils, which I will talk about, which is like, I guess, a perfect transition to Paris. So I think now we'll talk about the Paris Masters, but I do want to say that I predicted Jannik Sinner winning the tournament, but he actually withdrew. So my prediction wasn't really, it didn't manifest itself, and I just went with a safe pick with Jannik Sinner because I feel like Jannik and Alcaraz are so reliable these days that as someone who's predicting the draw, they've been winning consecutive big tournaments that I feel confident predicting them to win again. But Jannik withdrew, and Alcaraz actually lost to Ugo Humbert, who is a player that's going to play the final tomorrow. I'm recording this on a Saturday. They're going to play the final on Sunday, and the final will be between Ugo Humbert and Alexander Zverev. I think Humbert will use the energy from the crowd. I think this will definitely be a huge benefit for him because Zverev, in my opinion, is a player that is really easy to get into his head. I think as long as because the French crowd, I feel like, is known for its one-sidedness, especially with players from France. And I think just small things like these really get into Zverev's head. I think a lot of the times he blames his losses on external factors because he's really confident about his game that sometimes you feel like it isn't himself perhaps, but it's the external factors. But in my opinion, I think as an athlete, you should be having a strong enough mental sort of control and the mental strength to control these external factors and just not let them bother you, even though it can be such a bother sometimes, I guess. But because of just where it is played, he just have to overcome these difficulties, which I'm not sure is an easy thing for him to do, because he's been into the finals of so many Grand Slams and just so many big tournaments, and after he loses some of these, he will just sometimes not blame himself, but just the surroundings, which is really not a good mindset, but it is what it is. And I think if Zverev doesn't overcome this mindset, he's not going to play a really great match against Humbert, because I watched a little of the Kachanov versus Humbert match, and Humbert was just using the crowd from like the energies. What am I saying? The crowd's energy, and just pumping his fist and just playing into the Frenchman that he is. And I think I'm really liking this. I'm sort of eating it up, because I think it's just fun to see, of course. But I think now I want to talk about some matches that I've watched, or just some interesting and upsets that I didn't expect. So the first one being Mannarino beating Tommy Paul. I think Tommy Paul is one of those players coming into this tournament really wanting to get that spot to maybe potentially qualify for the ATP Finals. So there was definitely a lot of pressure, but I think Mannarino, because he's from France and he's like using the energy of the crowd, I think that also helped him, alongside with obviously Tommy Paul's mental flaw. But I mean, it was an okay match. I'll link it below if you guys want to watch it. It wasn't like my favorite match of the year, but it's a watchable match. And then I have another match, which is Casper Ruud versus Thompson. To be honest, not really a great match. Like, nothing really, there wasn't a lot of great rallies. I think Ruud have a matchup problem against Jordan Thompson, and not just that, I feel like his the half of his year has just been horrible. He's not been doing as well. During the start of the year, he, I think, won more matches than anyone. He's really on a roll, even though he didn't have a lot of great titles, but he's just on a roll and constantly just winning matches and making deep runs. Maybe they're not to the finals, but at least he's making, for example, the semifinal, the quarterfinals. But now I feel like he's just been losing in the early rounds. And another player sort of I want to point out is Giovanni Mpetshi-Perricard. So I didn't talk about him last episode, but he's this amazing player. He won, I think, Basel's, which is the Swiss indoor tournament, and in the final he beat Ben Shelton. But let me just tell you about his run. So he played against James Duckworth in the round of 32, and then he beat Felix Auger-Aliassime. He then beat Denis Shapovalov, and then he beat Holger Rune, and then he beat Ben Shelton in the final. So it was such an impressive run for him. And if you really look at him playing, I think it's interesting. Especially, I feel like his game really shown through if it's like indoors, because there's no wind, and because serve is such an important element for him. Without the wind, I think he really have just such a great chance of using his serve and just building his game around his serve. And I think that's why he's just doing really well in these indoor tournaments. But again, I think him going really far in Paris, he beat Frances Tiafoe, really isn't a surprise. I think, well, just look at the stats. He had 28 aces compared to Frances Tiafoe's 10. So that's almost 3 times as much. So that's just kind of insane to me. But yeah, and that, I think you guys should all watch just Perricard play, because it's so unique. It looks like it's like old tennis in a way, because he's relying so much on his serve. But again, I think it's just an interesting way to approach modern day tennis. And Jack Draper also beat Taylor Fritz, which was, in my opinion, not that shocking, but I think we'll see more of these matchups later on next year maybe, because Jack Draper is emerging as one of these young talents who have the ability to beat these top-ranked players. And as I predicted, Arthur Fils did go pretty far. I think he beat some impressive players along his run. However, even though he didn't make it as far as I thought he was going to maybe make it to the semifinals, but I think he fell short in the round of 16 against Alexander Zverev. He did take a set of Zverev in the second set, but in the end, Zverev went to the finals, so Zverev is, I think, playing in a high level throughout this tournament. But apart from that, I also want to talk about Humbert beating Carlos Alcaraz. I did not watch this match at all. I think I was in school, so I was really busy studying, but Carlos lost the deciding set with a score of 5-7, which is really interesting to me because I feel like Carlos Alcaraz often win these sort of tight games now because he's been playing so many tight games against like such good players such as Jannik Sinner. I think he's used to playing at such like a tight level, but I think he maybe just choked a little. I will be watching the highlights after, and I will be linking this match for you guys just so you guys can sort of come up with an explanation to why he lost. Maybe type it in the comments and I'll see what I think with you guys. And that's it. I think the quarterfinals really isn't that interesting. We do have Tsitsipas making the quarterfinals, which is sort of a shocker just because Tsitsipas has not been performing well at all. He's ranked outside the world top 10, I believe. He's ranked number 10 in he's the 10th seed in this tournament. And yeah, so I'm kind of pumped for the final about Zverev and Humbert. I talked about Zverev's mental sort of game before, but I just want to say that really excited and can't wait to watch the finals with you guys. Okay, we've been talking too much about ATP. I want to move on to WTA now. So I want to talk about the WTA Finals, which is happening starting actually today in Riyadh. And I will be breaking down the singles draw for you guys. I didn't do like a full sort of bracket thing just because they're playing round robin. So let me explain the WTA Finals format for those of you that's new to this whole thing. So basically the top 8 players this year, they compete in a year-end final to decide who is basically the year-end champion, I guess, but it doesn't mean that if they win a title they're world number 1. It just adds extra points. But the only 2 potential contenders for world number 1 is Iga Swiatek and Aryna Sabalenka. Sabalenka is the number 1 seed going to this tournament, whereas Swiatek is the 2nd. So we'll talk about Sabalenka's group first. So Sabalenka's group consists of course, Aryna Sabalenka, Jasmine Paolini, Zheng Qinwen, and Elena Rybakina. So I'll be breaking down each of these players for you guys. So for Sabalenka, I really think she is the best player in the world this season, and like for the women's side. And right now I think she's been playing a lot of matches for sure, but she's always winning, and she's have such a dominance when it comes to playing on the hard court. I think it's really interesting to see how I think she will be able to win all 3 of her matches, but really interesting to see how she plays against Elena Rybakina. I feel like Elena haven't played in 3 months, so she's obviously going to be a little bit rusty, but both of these players are insanely good hitters. So just to watch a match between these two was definitely a treat. And then I'll be talking about Zheng Qinwen. So Zheng Qinwen is the informed player right now for sure. She's been winning a lot of titles, and for her to come into this tournament sort of as someone that's new, sort of in a similar situation with Paolini, I think these 2 people are people who are coming into this tournament that's like had a breakthrough this year. And I think that she's going to I think she's going to have a matchup issue against Sabalenka, but in the case of Elena Rybakina and Jasmine Paolini, I don't see the match with Rybakina being an incredible match just because Rybakina is playing a little bit rusty, and Jing Qinwen also hits the ball with a lot of power that sometimes can result in a lot of unforced errors. So not sure if that will be like a matchup that I'm really excited for, but her matchup against Paolini I think will be a great one. And in terms of Paolini, I think a lot of people tend to underestimate her, and I'm not going to underestimate her this time around. I've been underestimating her for too long, and I think she really have a chance alongside with Sabalenka to be the two players who will advance. And in the case of Aryna Rybakina, I really don't think her goal this year is to win this tournament, but rather to just get her body back into the match playing sort of mindset, just because she's been not playing a tournament for I believe 3 months. So for her to play an intense level tournament I think is really hard, and I don't expect her to go extremely far. But she did partner with actually Novak Djokovic's coach, which is I think a surprise. She's partnering with Goran Ivanisevic, and that's really interesting. I'm really interested to see how that goes. Like, kind of unexpected, but I think it'll be such a great partnership because Goran will bring sort of a light to Rybakina's team, which lacked before. And yeah, but as I said before, I think Sabalenka and Paolini will be the two to advance. They actually played their group stage today, and Sabalenka beat Jing Qinwen with a score of 6-3, 6-4, and Jasmine Paolini beat Aryna Rybakina with a score of 7-5 in the first set with tiebreak and 6-4 in the second. So kind of interesting, but I think Paolini and Sabalenka will advance. I think Paolini beating Rybakina really isn't a huge shock, but I think the match that will be a really great match, and maybe the match of the group, will be Paolini versus Jing Qinwen. So I think that match will decide who advances. I think Sabalenka will advance, but it's between Paolini and Jing Qinwen to decide for themselves who will advance out of this group. As for the other group, we have the 2nd seed Iga Swiatek and the 8th seed Barbara Krejcikova, the 3rd seed Coco Gauff, and the 6th seed Jessica Pegula. So I think I'll start off one by one again. So Iga Swiatek, she's been actually on a rest ever since the US Open, and she partnered with her coach, and she partnered with Naomi Osaka's former coach, Wim Fissette. So really interesting to see how she plays now. We've sort of never seen her after like a break from tennis, so kind of interesting to see how that goes. And I'm not sure, I think the draw is really friendly to her in a way that Coco Gauff, even though Coco Gauff is I think one of the on-form players right now, I think Iga just have such a dominant head-to-head against almost everyone in her group except for maybe Krejcikova, that I just think Iga will have a shot at advancing. And Krejcikova, on the other hand, I feel like her only highlight of this entire year is winning Wimbledon. I'm gonna underestimate her. I don't think she have a chance of winning any of the matches in her group. In fact, I think she'll be sort of a match that everyone is hoping to win in her group. Obviously, she can prove me totally wrong. I think because of her head-to-head with Iga, which is basically level-headed, I think she does have a chance out of everyone else to maybe win against Iga, because again, we've never seen how Iga plays after a break, so we don't know how her form is going to be. And then Coco Gauff, I think she is the informed player right now. I think she plays really well. She won China Open, and even though she's still having some serve issues, I think she's going to play just herself, and I'm really curious, I really don't know how she's going to play as well. I think her serve is just such a big question mark that I really can't pinpoint. If her serve goes well, she have really the capability of maybe even challenging Sabalenka, but if her serve just isn't going in and she's double faulting like 20 in a game, then honestly anyone can beat her. And the last player is Jessica Pegula. I feel like after US Open, we haven't heard that much from her. She's been playing tournaments though. In China Open, she made it to the round of 16th, and in Wuhan, she actually lost to Wang Xinyu in the round of 16th. So she also haven't been that hot coming into the WTA Finals. So I would say my two picks for this group is Iga Swiatek and Coco Gauff. So yeah, I think that's all my picks, and I'll end of this episode here. I'm not going to predict the semifinals and the finals. I'll be predicting them once the round robin finishes, but I'm really excited that firstly the tennis season is coming to an end, because that means more tennis and a lot of great quality matches. But I'm also kind of sad because there's going to be a long period of off season. It's a good thing, I guess, for the players to just rest up after such a chaotic year. But yeah, and if you guys haven't subscribed to my social media, you should. It's at Tennis Traverse. That is at Tennis Traverse on Instagram and Twitter. And if you're listening on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe. If you're listening on other streaming platforms, please rate my show. And I think that's all. And I'll see you guys next week, where we talk about the Paris Masters final as well as the WTA Finals results. I'm so excited. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.